Hi.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Great. Nice to meet you.
You too.
All right. So I'm gonna make an introduction. That will be on the YouTube video. I'll edit this stuff out later on.
Okay.
Um, all right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live show. My name is Rania, and these are our co-hosts, Sarah and Enza, and we are part of Novelit, a nonprofit organization created to promote and diversify the literary world.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Enza and I'm the secretary for Novelit.
All right, so joining us today is Erin Forbes, a young author who published her series Fire and Ice. We are excited to learn more about you and what it was like being a teen author, so let's jump in.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here.
All right, so we would like to know more about your planning process. What inspired your books and how has that inspiration followed you throughout the series?
So for me, I think I started writing when I started writing the first book in my series when I was about 12. It wasn't published until I was 16, but what kind of inspired the whole story was I was sort of shifting into the teen section of the bookstore, and I found that there was a lot of really dark and depressing stories, and I wanted to create something that was really uplifting and something that made my readers feel stronger than they were before they started reading it. Um, and I had the inspiration for my Fire and Ice book series for a little while, and I had always dreamed of writing my own book, so I kind of just dove into it, and I was like, you know what, even if I don't get this published, at least I'm writing it for myself. And of course, I did end up publishing it, but that was my main inspiration, I think.
Are there any authors who also inspire you?
There's so many different authors who inspire me. I think it's really funny because for me, I've always been terrible at picking a favorite author or a favorite book just because there's so many that I love. But as far as authors that inspire me in writing my Fire and Ice book series, I think that C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, um, different authors like Jane Austen or Ellen Montgomery, even though that's sort of a different genre, I still find a lot of inspiration in their use of language and their world building. So, yeah.
So, do you believe in writer's block?
I definitely believe in writer's block. I would say, though, that sometimes we believe that we can't do anything when we have writer's block, but I think that there are ways that we can go about getting through it. For me, I don't encounter it as much as I used to. I think writer's block is very common it can be common at any stage, but I found that it was most common for me when I had first started writing my books. Once you really get into the world that you've created, I feel like there's just so many different things coming into your imagination that you always have something to bounce off of. So when I'm working through writer's block, I try to get outside, I try to read more, try to write more, listen to music, excuse me. um, but other than that, yeah, I think I do believe in writer's block, but there are many ways to work through it.
All right, how long does it take you on average to write a book?
I would say that there's a different time span for each of the books that I've created. My first book, like I said, I started writing when I was 12. I didn't publish it until I was 16, so there was quite a gap in between when I began it and when I actually published it. But with my second book, it took me less than a year from writing it to getting it out there. On average, I would say probably about a year and a half is how long it takes me to create a first draft. And then I work through it and I go through the editing process and everything. It's taken a couple years for the one that I'm working on right now, but that's because it's the finale of the series and there's a bit more to it. But I would say it depends on each book.
That makes sense. So are you more of a planner or a pantser when it comes to writing your books?
I'm definitely more of a planner. When I'm in the beginning phases of writing and even editing, I would say I have a whole board of like sticky notes and things that I like plot out each chapter. And it's easier for me because I think that it kind of gives me a guide as to where I'm going. And as long as I know where I'm going, I don't stop. I can just get it done a lot faster. I know some people, they're more of a pantser and it's easier for them to just get everything out and then edit it later. But for me, I like to have things plotted out first.
That is so good to know. So now we want to ask a bit more questions about your book in general and the series. So first, I want to know, how do you pronounce your world? Is it Ailing or Aisling?
So Ashling, it's like
Ashling.
ASH almost, so Ashling. It's the Irish Gaelic word for dream or vision. So it's actually a very popular Irish girl's name as well. But all of those Irish language names are sometimes hard to pronounce.
That's true. That's so good to know. So as a fantasy author, what are the moments in your life that you find resonates most with your book's world, or even just fantasy in general?
I would say that one of my favorite things about writing fantasy is that even though it takes place in a magical world and there's all of these otherworldly type things, the main themes of it are, in my books, sisterhood, friendship, all these different things, family. And those things, even though they take place in a fantasy world, they're very relatable to the life that I live. So, I'd say that for me, the most relatable things in my books are the relationships. Alice's relationship with her sister or her grandmother. Those are definitely they resonate the most with me.
That's really good to know. So we talked a bit about Ashling. Okay, it's Ashling. So how did you select the names of your characters? I find it really interesting how you related the name of your world to dreams in general, which is, just like a really cool connection. So how did you select the names of your main characters?
So when I'm creating a character, which is like my absolute favorite thing to do being a writer, is because, you get to name them, you get to pick all their personality traits and their appearance and just create this whole character straight from your imagination. When I'm naming them, I think the name is one of the first things that I go off of. So I come up with, for example, when I was creating Ariadne Moss, who's one of the main characters in my books, um, her trait that I kind of based her on was this sense of humor and sarcasm, but also a quiet demeanor. So Ariadne I think it's a Greek name, but I have a cousin named Ariadne too. So sometimes it's named after people who I know. Sometimes it's just beautiful Irish names and their meanings. Oftentimes I just try to look at the meaning of the name and see how that relates to the story or the character arc of that particular character.
Interesting. So tell us a bit more about your main characters. What makes them tick?
So my main characters are Alice and Emery. They are twin sisters and they have the powers of fire and ice, as the series says. The whole story is written from Alice's perspective and just kind of her journey to discovering her gift and, how it is going to lead her on this journey to this new realm, Ashling. And I think they're kind of polar opposites. And I inspired that by like Alice, her power is fire, and Emery's power is ice and water. And those are two like opposing elements. So even though they click so well together as twin sisters, there are also polar opposites. One has red hair, one has blonde hair, one's quiet, one is loud and fierce. So I think that those are definitely the things that make them tick. They have their own individual personalities, and I'd love to see how they work together throughout the series.
That's really good to know. And so you mentioned that most of the book series is written through one character's POV. Do you ever see yourself venturing out of that, as in writing it from the other sister's POV or someone else's, or maybe even an antagonist's POV?
So I have thought about that. When I first started writing the Fire and Ice book series, there's the four elementals, and I knew that this was going to be a 4-book series. So if you're not familiar with the books, the elementals are the four main characters: Alice, Emery, Ariadne, and Juniper. And they all have, the four elements: fire, ice, wind, and earth. So I thought about in the very beginning doing each book from one of their perspectives. But for me as a reader, I think I love getting to journey with one particular character throughout the whole series and kind of just see how they grow as an individual. You can see that from a different perspective. From Alice's perspective, I can see how Emery grows, but I really wanted to be rooted in that one character. So in the future, I may write another sub series that takes place in the Fire and Ice world, but from the perspective of a different character. I haven't quite figured that out yet.
Yeah, that's really cool. I also agree. It's really nice to just follow a single character throughout the whole story and see how they develop and grow. It's just a really nice journey.
Definitely.
And so you talk about how all of your main characters are related to a single element. We have water, fire, ice, Aaron, earth. So which one of these do you relate to the most? It could be astrologically because we have our star signs and they kind of are related to a single element, or it could be personality wise.
I think when I first started writing the books, I kind of took a piece of my personality from and like amplified it within each of those characters. So, I'm more introverted, I'm kind of quiet, and I kind of took that from Ariadne and amplified it a little bit. But I also have, I'm very passionate about the things that I do. So I think I kind of amplified that within Alice. Um, but out of the four characters, I think that one who I relate to the most is definitely either Juniper Stone or Alice Hanley, because Juniper has this way of looking at the world where she sees magic in everything and she loves nature, and I think that's something that I can really resonate with. Alice is just so enraptured by her own journey, and I love getting to see how she grows, and I kind of can see the parallels in how she's grown throughout the series to how I've grown throughout the years. So I think that those are the two I definitely resonate with the most.
Cool. So if you could describe your finale in one word, which would it be?
Mm, breathtaking.
Breathtaking. Wow, cool. So what is one surprising thing that you've discovered while writing this series?
For me, I think the most surprising thing about creating a fantasy world is just realizing how real that world can become to you as the writer and to your readers. I think that especially when we're writing it and it's not yet shared with the world, sometimes we think this place only belongs to me. But once it's published and once it's out there in the world, people who read it, it means something to them. And you can kind of see how, wow, I created this world and I created these characters in the ways that they relate to me, and somebody else has had a profound impact by that, and they see it in their own way and in their own life how it resonates with them. So
I definitely agree. And lastly, from my section, which of these books was the most enjoyable to write? I know that some authors usually prefer writing their first book. Some have sort of like a middle book syndrome in which like the second or third book is kind of hard to write, and some prefer the finale. And which of your books was the easiest or most enjoyable to write?
so far, at least, the most enjoyable book to write was The Kindred Woods, which is my latest release. It is the third book in the series. I think for me, it was just such a page turner, and it was so action packed, so many things going on within the story, and one element of the plot would relate to another, and it just sort of bounced off each other. And that book especially was one where plots from the previous books came to um, finally like maybe make sense a little bit more, because I always like to tell people that my books are like a spider web. They each relate to each other, and maybe there's a piece of book one that you don't understand the significance of until book three, and that's just the way that it is. So I think for me, book three was just the the climax of the whole series, and it was definitely super enjoyable to write.
That's great. We were very happy to hear about your book. It's really an amazing book. But now we want to talk more about the publishing process, as it is something that a lot of people are curious about. So my first question for you is, could you tell us more about your publishing experience, since more and more writers are submitting manuscripts and the industry is getting a lot more competitive?
Of course, yeah. So, as an author, there are so many different ways that you can approach publishing. You could go through a traditional publishing house like HarperCollins. You could do hybrid publishing. There are some publishing houses that are kind of a mix of both traditional and self-publishing, or you could just completely self-publish. For me, I went the complete self-publishing route because I was super interested in the creativity involved in it. I really wanted to have a say in how my cover looked. I wanted to work one-on-one with my editor, and all of those things were really important to me because I'm not just an author, but I'm an artist and I'm a creative person who has their vision for their work and, wants that to be what's presented to the world. So for me, that's the route that I took, and I kind of, you know, took on the project myself and decided I'm going to find a perfect editor, I'm going to find a perfect cover designer, and I'm going to make this book happen on my own terms. So, I ended up working with an online publishing platform, which is used for self-publishers to get their books in print. And I kind of navigated it myself after learning a lot from fellow authors and writers, and kind of, gaining wisdom from them.
Do you think you will continue like doing a lot more of self-publishing, or would you like maybe one day try the more traditional route?
I have considered doing traditional sometime in the future, but at the same time, I so love being a self-published author because I'm the owner of my own work. I love the responsibility that comes with it. Marketing my books myself and all of that. I'm not saying that I wouldn't ever explore traditional publishing. I very well may. There are some children's books that I'm working on right now that I've thought about, working with an agent and getting them traditionally published. But I think right now I'm really happy with where I am in self-publishing. So
That's great. When you published your first book, did that experience help you grow as a writer, and how did it help you?
oh yeah, publishing my first book was definitely a real learning process for me. I'm the first author in my family. I didn't really know that much about it. I did a lot of research beforehand, but I would say you never really know how it is until you do it yourself. So as soon as I got my book out there, I was kind of thrown into the thick of it. And it was definitely a real learning experience. But at the same time, once I had my first book out there, I knew how things went. So it was a lot quicker getting my second book out after that.
That's great. And for you, what do you think is the best way to market your books?
For myself, at least with my target audience, which is, teenagers and young adults, I think that social media is one of the best ways to market. I have a page on Instagram, which is at Fire and Ice Book Series, where I strictly just post about my books. And, I share events, I share reviews, I share quotes, all these different things, which is great because there's a wonderful community of readers on Instagram where they call it Bookstagram. And, you can find lots of new reads on there and get recommendations from other people. So I think it's a wonderful community to share your work on. I also have my personal author page where people can get to know me as a writer and as a person. And that's at Erin Forbes author. So I think that social media is really wonderful in marketing books these days.
Do you think that now with like social media being more like prevalent in our lives, that more people will choose to self-publish and market through that?
I do think so. Yeah, I found lately a lot that people do choose to market their books through social media because it's something that people use every day almost. But there are also different things like, podcasts or, newspaper articles or just even um, conferences like this that I'm having with you guys that are wonderful ways to market. People want to hear your voice as an author and they want to hear what you have to say about your work as well as other works in the literary industry. So I think just in general, keeping in mind that people want to hear your voice is the way to go about it.
Okay, great. So these are the last two questions are a bit more like questions about like uh, if you've ever like considered writing under like a pen name or like a pseudonym. Like,
Mhm.
have you ever thought of that?
I have thought about it. I I didn't think about it until after I published under my actual name. But, at this point I've established Erin Forbes as my author name, so I think I'm going to stick with that for as long as I live because I have developed quite an audience of readers and I think that changing my name now would be a little bit odd. But I do know a lot of writers who write under pseudonyms and I think that is smart and definitely kind of cool.
If you actually could change your pen name, what would it be like? What names have you considered?
I've thought about doing, instead of my last name, just doing my first and middle name, which is Erin Elizabeth. I have a lot of writer friends who do that. I think Millie Florence and Sarah Francis might do that as well. two of my close author friends. Other than that, I don't know. I think I would have to think about it for a while.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And now we went to more like fun kind of questions that are not necessarily like related to like literature and the book process. So yeah, if you could choose to be a book character for a day, who would it be and why?
I think, oh, there's so many different book characters in other novels besides what I've written. But if I could choose any book character to be, it would definitely be Alice, because my own, main character, because I've always imagined stepping into the own world that I've created and just like living it out as if it were real. So I think to be my main character and physically step into my world would be the coolest thing.
And is there any authors that you really look up to and idolize when you're writing?
I think, like I said earlier, I really look up to authors like C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien for their world building. And I try to kind of take inspiration from them and the many ways that they've grown their literary worlds that they've created. Whether it be the politics of that world or the aesthetics or the landscape and how the characters fit into it. I think that there's so many different authors who create these worlds that seem so real, and there's so much inspiration to take from that.
So would you say that like world building is more important than like the plot, or like
No,
what do you think for you is the more important?
I think I would say that world building is an essential element to creating a book, um, because you want your reader to feel like they're pulled into that world and like they really understand it, and see that it's almost as complex as the world that we live in. But I would say that there are so many different elements to a successful book. You need likable characters that you can root for. You need a plot that is consistent and makes sense. No plot holes, as in, or and you also need world building. So there are so many different elements, and I wouldn't say that one's more important than the other, but there needs to be a good balance of them all.
I definitely agree with that. And so you know how Harry Potter has like the Harry Potter like world, and like it's they have like attractions and like amusement parks.
Yeah.
If you could create like a roller coaster ride based on your books, what would be your first idea?
Oh, that is such a cool idea. I think that if I could make a roller coaster for the Fire and Ice book series, I would probably. So in my book series, there's two different forests called the Night Oak Forest and the White Birch Forest, and they're kind of like almost like Alice and Emery. They're like polar opposites. One of them is very dark and mysterious, and there's these creatures called the creatures of the Night Oak Forest that live within it, um, and they're like these dark spirits that kind of send bad messages to people, and people go missing in this forest. And then in the White Birch Forest, it's beautiful and radiant and there's fairies and all these things. So for a roller coaster, I think it would be so cool if like you just went spiraling through each of those forests and kind of like were immersed into it. I don't know, that's just my idea.
That does sound a lot of fun, honestly. Next, what is the first book that made you like cry?
The first book that made me cry. It's probably kind of embarrassing, but when I was in middle school, I loved the Warrior Cat series. It was really silly. But I don't know if you guys ever read them, by Erin Hunter. It's like about these cats who live in the wild and they have their own communities. I think the first book that made me cry was probably the last Warrior Cat book, where the main character died. That one made me cry as a child. But the last book that made me cry recently was probably the one that I'm working on right now, which is The Ember Sword, the fourth book in my series. I think as a writer, you get so invested in your own books that you get emotional about them and the character development and different things that happen that you're like, oh my goodness, like I could just cry right now.
Um, I do think that Warrior Cats is a very unique choice.
I know.
But I agree. When like a character dies that you get really attached to, it's definitely worth crying over.
Yes.
Now, like a more lighthearted question. If you could choose celebrity parents, who would you choose?
If I could choose celebrity parents, who would I choose? I don't think I would choose. My parents are like celebrities themselves. They're superheroes. My parents are so encouraging in all the things that I do, and I feel like they're such big inspirations to me that I wouldn't switch them out for anyone, even if it were the most famous person out there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Parents are pretty great.
Yeah.
Um, if you were a tour guide in your world, and you had to bring in like visitors, what is something you would like for them to see, and what would be the impression you would want them to have of that world?
I think that if I were to show them one particular thing within the world of Ashling, it would probably be the Academy for Gifted Youth, which is where Alice and Emery first head when they go into the realm through the portal. They go to the Academy for Gifted Youth and they learn about the Gifted Society, which is where they originate from, where everyone has a unique, one-of-a-kind magical power that sets them apart from the rest of the world. I think the world that I've created within that castle, that school, is really unique and wonderful. And I'd love to just, take people through and show them around, show them the dining hall, show them, the dorms where Alice and Emery live, show them the secret passageways and all these different things. So I think, yeah, that's probably where I would take them. And I'd want them to have the impression that this was a homey place and it was very welcoming and magical and unlike anything they'd ever seen before.
That is so good to know. Honestly, like your description of the whole world makes me want to read this book. Like I'm actually going to pick up this book after the interview because it just sounds like such a comforting world. And so,
Oh, that's wonderful. That makes me so
yeah.
happy to hear.
And so that's all we have for you. Thank you so much for joining this interview. It was really great to know about your experience as well as your world and just, your personal details.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be a guest on your show. And good luck with all the work that you guys are doing. I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. And good luck with your final book. I can't wait to dive into your series.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good one.